Tonight, you're not watching the sun sink and vanish behind the desert. You're stepping onto the boat that follows it into the dark. Before you fall asleep, you'll ride the 12 hours of Egypt's night, meet the crew of gods who keep Ra's bark moving one gate at a time, and listen to a water clock measure out the darkness in patient drops. You'll see how priests on the riverbank read from painted walls, while the solar boat glides through caverns that have their own names, their own guards, and their own timetable. A reed boat bumps a wooden key. The sound is small, like a cleared throat. Kiffy smoke curls up beside you, thick as a slow river, carrying honey, wine, and resin. Somewhere in the temple above, a clepsydra begins to tick in liquid stitches. Each drop is an hour that hasn't happened yet. Stars lean over the Nile as if checking the passenger list, and the air takes on that cool, waiting stillness just before a journey starts. If nights like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing. And if you share where and what time you're listening from, perhaps the next soft bump of the hull will remember you there, half awake while the sun quietly boards its midnight boat. Because this story of Ra's journey through the Duat doesn't begin at sunrise. It begins when someone lights the kiffy and starts the clock. You might not expect a whole night to have instructions, but on the Nile the darkness came with a timetable so tidy you could almost set a water clock by it. Picture a reed boat rubbing a wooden key while kiffy smoke turns like a lazy river in the air. A soft door knock, the briefest hush, and then everyone remembers their places. The sun steps off stage and Rai takes the night shift, which sounds dramatic until you notice the pace he keeps. 1 hour per gate. The bark noses into the first cavern of the Duat as calmly as someone finding their favorite page in a well-thumbed book. The god stands beneath a canopy. Seal, the cool sense of perception, and Hu, the unhurried authority of speech, come to stand where they always stand. Mayhem coils around the deck like living rope, a serpent who is not a problem but a blanket with opinions. Above, the stars crowd the gunwale, polite oarsmen who will not splash. There is no horn to sound departure, no shouted order. The helmsman looks once across the line of priests in the world above, and they look back through their rituals, and everyone agrees to a pace so humane that even thoughts can keep up with it. On the walls of tombs, a map is patiently painted, 12 tidy registers like lines of calm handwriting. Names of caverns, crews, gatekeepers. Not a maze, just an itinerary. The Amduat and the Book of Gates supply more than myth here. They offer a script with stage directions that are oddly domestic. Greet these watchers, say these words, look over there. The boat will pass the guardians the way a courteous neighbor passes sleeping dogs, by using the correct doorway, by not hurrying, by carrying the right scent of resin and breath. You can trace the line of the voyage with your eyes, while the sun is busy setting somewhere else, seeing how the ink promises order where darkness might be tempted to improvise. The promise is important. The night will be long, but it will not be vague. Even the gods enjoy a checklist. The priests above match the movement by reading the right column at the right hour, like librarians who love a schedule more than any plot twist. Someone adjusts the lamp Wicca fingers with and believes, quite rationally, that this helps the sky. By the 3rd hour, the darkness has the temperature of Whetstone, which is to say, comforting if you lean on it. The bark glides past fields where the justified dwell. It is said that the rays from the sun, God touch bandage and name and wake both gently, like a hand finding a warm cup in the dark. Offerings written earlier in the bright world become food now, which feels like a very efficient grocery system. Labels wake jars the way quiet bells wake old friends. Raj's not in a rush, and neither is anyone else. A roll call travels across the blessed as the boat passes. It's an administrative kindness, and Egypt was good at those. Every hour opens a storeroom of warmth. Breath finds a steady measure. Inhale on 4, exhale on 6, because the caverns answer with dew, and newsprint thin mist that fold over the gunnel, not menacing, simply present, like the cool note inside a clay jar. A priest above checks a clepsydra and listens to little stitches of water fall. Minutes become hours without complaint. The clock and the temple agree that sound is a reliable librarian of time. The stars lean a little closer to read the names etched at the gates. The voices that speak them do not argue. They recite with the calm cheer of people who have memorized the bus route and enjoy pointing out the stops. Incense sputters like a patient brazier. A new spoon of kiffy makes the air taste sweet and the hour keep proper posture. The river below and the ritual above keep each other honest. If the wick gutters, the reader clears his throat, and if the reader yawns, the wick seems to steady out of sympathy. There is a geometry to this. The boat, the caverns, the priests, and even the scented smoke each hold a corner of a square that keeps the world from sagging where the weight of night gathers. If a thought wanders, it is brought gently back by the metronome of the lamp. A soft inhale when the flame rises, a slow exhale when it settles. You can try it with your own breathing and fool your bones into thinking the Nile is very close. Many people in Egypt did exactly this and reported no side effects except tidy sleep. When hour 7 arrives, a practical hush moves across the crew. It is the narrow place, the stretch of river that tightens as reeds learn to grow spines. Apophis waits here the way a shadow waits for a wall, not so much evil as stubborn, like a sandbank that refuses to file the correct paperwork. Spells are spoken like knots short, deliberate, pulled tight without drama. The prow is a desk. The helmsman becomes a calligrapher. Mahan loosens his coils a fraction, which in serpent language means putting on weary glasses. The boat steadies without lurching. A spear flashes once and is forgotten like a comma, because the point is not a fight, but a sentence that needs a small, precise mark to move forward. You can imagine the gods getting through every night on punctual grammar. Apep slacks, the deck breathes again without applause, and the bark keeps its place in the river the way a sentence keeps its place in a paragraph. You could read with your eyes half closed. Repairs and renewals follow as if by committee. The prow is washed with words. Places where glare were it thin are touched by paint, more charm than lacquer, but who says paint cannot be a charm if it knows the formula for shine? CL notes what was learned with the tone of someone updating a ledger that will be very satisfying to balance at dawn. Who phrases the lesson for next time in a voice that makes you want to rewrite your to-do list so it contains only one item in a nap? Maine uncoils to check the rail and then settles back around Rye like cool rope around a sleeping jar. A breeze finds them and decides to help. Nobody celebrates. It is more dignified to resume the pace. The gods are not fatigued so much as steadily interested. It feels like the part of the night when people reorganize a drawer and choose to keep only the spoons that match. Attention ebbs, returns, ebbs again, like the weight of sheets when you're nearly asleep. By hour 10 dawn is being assembled elsewhere, which is a strange sentence until you remember how many things are assembled elsewhere. Bread in dark ovens news in rooms too bright, and an Egypt day built up from dismembered light. Stars hand down their small portions. Taverns pass it along, because in a country of fields you learn to move grain and brightness by measure. Old age takes off the cloak and hands it to youth in dignified silence. Names help the light find itself. Each name clicks into the body of day and holds. The crew puts color where color belongs, then heat, then wind. Like careful workers refurbishing a familiar statue with fresh pigment and tidy tools. Each piece enters the morning like a tile being slid into a mosaic. Nothing is dropped, nothing is rushed. If someone had invented checkboxes, a god would be ticking them with a little smile. A bedtime oath for daybreak is spoken the way one ties a knot in a string not to forget. Keep facts in one jar. 12 hours, 12 gates, one boat. Keep hope in another small but board steady. If fear wakes, rewrite the line shorter and speak it once. Then let the water clock count the rest of the persuading. Ra's bark rounds the last bend, and the eastern horizon rearranges itself into a door with polite hinges. The helmsman sees the first hinge shine and decides to clean the second for symmetry. Temples exhale, windows learn the new light. It isn't dramatic, just inevitable, like dust settling in places that will look better for it. Above ground, priests lift their eyes from columns of ink and realize their mouths have been moving on time all night. Somewhere, a scribe adds one dot to a ledger because the sun has appeared where it usually appears and budgets like rhythm. Imagine, as Egyptians certainly did, a house in the city where a tiny water clock kept the same beat. A child hears the jars drip into jars and thinks of the boat sliding through caverns with names as long as cool corridors. A grandmother thinks of offerings labeled clearly in earlier daylight, of bread and beer that will be food tonight for somebody else's journey. The label feels more important than the bread for a moment, which is a very Egyptian feeling. Words hold shape while the world stretches and yawns. Someone has tucked a little amulet of the eye into a woven mat near the door, the width of 2 barley grains, because 2 barley grains are practical and keep things modest. If you're still listening, let your own room accept small charms without checking receipts. A favorite cup left just so. A book you meant to finish but won't. The boat knows about unfinished books. Even Ra rides past long shelves of them written onto walls. The hours are nearly finished, and the crew keeps the same pace, because the point of a schedule is not speed, but mercy. The duet closes like a drawer that was never stuffed to begin with. A last breeze is folded and put away. Maine gives the deck an approving turn of his head that means, in serpent etiquette, this will file. Sayo records the shape of the night as if it were a clean geometry proof that relies on nothing heroic. Only patient naming. Who clears his throat once, satisfied with the sentences that kept the river so well behaved. Somewhere, in registers painted in the exact same order as breath, a small boat drawn in red ochre reaches the edge of a line and stops because the line stops, and that is perfect. The priests above finish the column where the ink is narrowest and set down their pens on purpose. Not from tiredness, but to hear the hush they've been weaving. You can keep breathing on 4 and 6 if it pleases you. The lamp by your bed understands the metronome and doesn't mind being part of a temple for a while. If a thought arrives with more teeth than you prefer, give it a map with 12 boxes and let it choose a gate to move through, 1 per hour, no skipping, no hurry. If it still grumbles, send it to Who for phrasing. He knows how to make even difficult ideas stand with good posture. The night will carry you without drama. There will be a tight place, then repairs and renewals. Then a morning you won't have to assemble because the crew is doing that already, somewhere carefully off stage. The river under the bark continues to applaud very quietly. The oarsmen of Starlight return to their polite stations at the gunwale. The helmsman checks the way the east is starting to soften and nods, which is maritime for yes, this has all been done correctly again. Ra steps out where he always steps out, and people who did not consult the timetable still find the sun on time. The bark rests like a numeral put back onto its shelf. The priests close their books with a small push of the thumb and slide them exactly parallel. In homes, the clepsydra is emptied and turned, in case someone wants a very precise nap later. The world continues to pretend its edges are hard. The river knows better, and so do you, lying still while pages turn somewhere far underground. You are not asked to do anything except trust that order is friendlier than it sounds. 12 hours, 12 gates, 1 boat, a little smoke, a little breath. The map finishes where sleep begins, the pen stops. The water clock counts 1 more drop and then another, without insisting on applause. If you drift, the crew will mark the names for you, and if you stay awake a while longer, the oarsmen are practiced at rowing in a whisper. The itinerary can start again in the time it takes for a wick to bloom and dim a soft hour at a time. And none of it needs to end, not here, not exactly, just soften into the lighter gray that opens a window and test the sill with a faint, tidy hand. You might not expect a river to keep such punctual hours, but Egypt's night is very polite about schedules. The sun sets, and somewhere a priest taps a rim of copper as if clocking in for the dark shift. The solar boat waits at its quay like a long, patient reed, and the first coolness of evening presses on your forearms in a way that makes ink dry faster. This is the hour when Ray steps aboard, when a door turns out to be a horizon, and when the deck creaks the way papyrus creaks before it says anything important. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can promise to like and follow this sleepy voyage, or you can let that promise float by like a lotus cup and count as engagement for the fish. I won't tell them. We have 12 hours to cross, and the boat prefers a calm listener more than a noisy fanfare, so tuck your thoughts under the bench, put your posture elbows on the smooth rail, and notice how everyone up here knows exactly where to stand without being told. Ra takes the center spot under a canopy that smells faintly of myrrh and that quiet, clean scent of linen warmed in the afternoon. Near him stand and who perception and authoritative speech, wearing their titles like pocket tools. It is a very Egyptian idea that one god steers with knowledge, while another steers with the right phrasing, the way a modern traveler needs both a good map and the correct spelling of a Wi-Fi password. Around the gunwale, the constellations collect like oarsmen who forgot their oars but brought their patience. When they lean in, you feel the deck shift a finger's width, nothing dramatic, like a sigh deciding to stay a sigh. Mahim, the serpent, who is also a wraparound shield, coils himself along the rail in a comfortable spiral and settles his scales where wood meets darkness. His job is defense, but his rhythm is a lullaby, a slow flex, a slow release, so reassuring that even the boat's ropes seem to breathe with him. A helmsman kneels by the rudder and settles into the only tempo this crew ever uses, 1 hour per gate. No hurry, no drift, the way a shelf of clay jars says 1 jar per day and not a drop more. In the last copper light, a steward checks the offering baskets and seals the lids, mumbling the practical version of devotion: enough bread, enough beer, enough wisdom to go around, and nobody making speeches. The walls along this route are already written, and the writing is very tidy about it. In tomb chambers back in the daylight world, the path of the night is painted in 12 horizontal rows, like lines in a notebook for the patient handwriting of eternity. Names of caverns and crews and gatekeepers sit in short columns beside vignettes of the boat, and it all looks a little like the world's oldest station map. Here is who you greet, here is what you say, here is where you look away politely to avoid embarrassing a crocodile with too many teeth. The Amduat and the Book of Gates serve as a kind of user manual for night travel pictures for when you read drowsy, captions for when you're very drowsy. A scribe once explained that to read such walls, you don't move your eyes the way you do with letters. You move your breath instead, pacing phrases with your chest, and the images agree with you by nodding forward. That is exactly how the boat takes the first cavern. The water hushes under the prow, and the bank slides past with that luxurious efficiency only a dark river knows. Somewhere below our feet, a jar of kifi incense begins to curl its smoke like a river that doesn't need a shoreline. We all learn the lesson of this boat early. The map is not for hurrying. The map is for not getting lost while you walk very slowly. By the 3rd hour, the deck has learned the night's vocabulary. We pass the fields of the blessed, and the gentle rays that leak from the god as body reach the reeds with the same courtesy they give to mummies. It's said the dead breathe in time with these rays. Inhale when the light brushes bandage. Exhale when it drifts to the jars where their names are written. The labels on those jars work like Bell's quiet ones, each ringing out a syllable that is also a spoonful of food. You may find it oddly sweet that Egypt trusted handwriting to be edible. If a scribe wrote bread carefully enough, the dead felt full. Anyone who has ever written a to-do list and then felt inexplicably lighter understands this metaphysics from the inside. Res Crew calls roll among the justified like teachers who prefer their students to be drowsy but present. With each hour, a storeroom of warmth opens somewhere below the waterline. There is a mathematics to this charity, a sense that the sun has a budget and keeps its ledger in brightness rather than numbers. You can almost hear CL tallying it with the tip of a reed pen, and who approving the phrasing so that a good deed becomes not only done, but properly filed. Up in the temple above the river, somebody tends the clepsydra, the water clock that turns minutes into a thin, obedient thread. It is not a dramatic instrument. A priest leans near it, listening in such a friendly way that the clock doesn't fear being watched. Drops fall and stitch the hour together, and each stitch is a little loop that keeps the ritual from unraveling. Stars make their own versions of lists overhead. The deacon small groups of stars that take turns rising lift on cue, like troops of angels with very detailed call sheets. Names are recited at the gates so that hinges open with good manners. A brazier is fed with new kiffy at intervals that always feel sooner than you expect, which is the secret of staying awake gently. Time is marked by scent and ash. The river below and the temple above keep each other honest like two old clerks who don't speak much but share a ledger. If your mind wanders, that's completely acceptable here. Let it step out and count a few stars by itself and then come back. The boat will still be moving at exactly 1 hour per date, as indulgent as a grandmother shelling beans. When the 7th hour opens, the river narrows in the way a careful thought narrows. The reeds stand up straighter, and the current grows a backbone. Everyone on deck becomes a touch more precise without fuss. Spells are prepared the way sailors coil rope short, deliberate, easy to unspool. This is the stretch famous for the knife kept ready for Apophis, the great coil of refusal who prefers the sun never to arrive on time. The ancient poets sometimes called him a darkness that pretends not to be a snake, which always sounds like a joke told in a whisper. Our crew, who have handled him nightly since there was a nightly, do not perform big heroics. They do maintenance. The protective serpent Mahan loosens his rings just enough to be flexible. The helmsman shifts his knee a finger breadth. CL notes what happened last night with a voice like neat marginalia. Who phrases the command for tonight in a way that makes obedience feel like common sense? When the boat shudders, as boats do when the river's mood changes, everyone takes the same breath. In on 4 and out on 6, and the deck itself seems to inhale with us. A spear of light flickers, procedural, not dramatic, and the planks settle without bothering to applaud. Then comes that quiet part sailors love, where you check the edges of things. The prow is washed with words, gentle scrubbing where glare might have thinned the paint. The lamp glass gets turned a quarter turn so the smudge becomes a halo again. Where the planking shows a tired seam, the carpenter nods the way an old friend nods at another old friend and fits a patch that has been waiting for exactly this kindness. Mahan uncoils for a moment and slithers along the gunnel, like cool rope being tested for stretch, then returns to his spiral. Even the stars seem to give the boat a tiny inspection. A few brighter ones line up as if checking our paperwork. There's no celebration afterward, only readiness, which is the most Egyptian ending to a task. You place the tool back where it belongs and smooth the sand, and the smoothness is the applause. It is oddly comforting to know that even gods fix things by touching them lightly and often. During the 10th hour, we collect dawn the way you might collect small shells in your pocket without looking at them yet. The horizon gathers its pieces. Light comes from backstage in polite envelopes, and the crew passes it hand to hand with the patient choreography of a warehouse that knows how to load delicate items. Someone says the eastern sky is being dressed, and that feels right. Old age steps away like a cloak, and youth steps forward with names pinned to it. Ra moves from elder to strong youth in the unhurried manner of a person changing chairs at a long dinner. The boat helps by arranging color, heat, and wind into the right shelves. Each gate clicks into the new hour with a sound so soft that you think you imagined it, which is best. The world you wake to should be handled like sleeping hair. Nothing is dropped, nothing is rushed, and even Apophis, having failed to end time again, drifts off into whatever place houses failed interruptions. It's a custom on this boat to keep facts in one jar, the kind of jar a household uses for flour or coffee beans. 12 hours, 12 gates, one crew, one boat, and hope poured small and steady. If your mind frets, the solution is a simple rule borrowed from scribes. Rewrite the worry shorter, space it once. Let water count the rest. The priests actually say this about letters that try to run too long. They are folded to neatness and kept under a string until morning, which is frankly a better strategy than arguing with them. Near the final bend, the bark rises, not dramatically, more like an exhale from a very deep room. Temples on the eastern bank begin to feel the new light on their facades and decide to open their doors half a palm's width. Somewhere, a house cat lifts one ear to the sun and then goes back to not caring. The sensation on deck is that your sandals know way less. We close the map, not to forget it, but in the way one closes a fan after the room has grown breezy by itself. Someone caps the lamp. Someone adjusts the wrappings around a basket of bread that has made the whole night smell kindly. If you like, you can make a small bedtime oath for daybreak. One gentle action, merely attempted, before the next sunset. The boat endorses small promises. It collects them like polished pebbles. The helmsman puts the bow toward the last gate without saying anything a person could quote. There is a feeling that the names of the caverns have grown lighter too, as if consonants could shed dust. Those who keep the water clock let it finish on its own, and then pour what remains back into a clean bowl, because time here, once used, returns to being water. A pantry note somewhere says that offerings will be needed for evening again, bread and beer, and the coppery sweetness of dates, and the note is so calm that it feels like a lullaby. The crew gathers cloths and coils lines and lifts items you cannot see into spaces you cannot name, but you can hear the inventory singing under their breath. Star, rope, word, breath. Star, rope, word, breath. They do not speak of victory because the boat is not a war. It is a commute, and commutes are better when nobody tries to make them famous. If you listen close, you might hear an administrative detail hum in the planks. The night has a ministry, and its decree is that the living and the dead should keep each other company without bothering each other too much. That's why an offering label can be supper and why a name can be light. It's why the protective eye painted on a coffin sometimes has a very specific width, just big enough for a departing glance and not an invitation to wander. It's why the gods aboard prefer titles that are really jobs. Perception and speech, steering and defense, counting and repair. Everything is austere in shape yet generous in purpose, like a measuring spoon that is also a charm. The last inches of darkness then. The river tastes a little herbal, as if leaves had been steeped in it, and the wind fits itself to your palm in a way that explains palmistry better than lines. You could, right now, promise to listen again another night, or you could drift into sleep and let the helmsman bring you to your pillow's shore. When the prow noses into morning, the crew disembarks almost invisibly. Temples sigh out a first hymn that sounds exactly like somebody opening shutters. Ross steps into his day with the grace of a person who found his sandals where he left them. The boatmen put the world's lids back on their jars and fold the map to the size of a breath. The river, having worked all night, pretends it did nothing but carry reflections. We douse the lamp and the kithy and your thoughts together, and we keep the rules that served us. 1 hour per gate, one small promise per day, one long kindness per life. If your eyes are heavy, this is deliberate engineering. If a reed bumps a wooden key in your mind, that is also part of the plan. The schedule will continue without you, which is the loveliest feature of schedules. They allow you to rest while time clocks in. And because Egypt likes its endings neat but never final, let us agree to forget where the first cavern began. Remember only that the map fits into your breath, and sail quietly, gently, without conclusion, as if the river wrapped the bed, and the bed remembered, and the world kept its whisper. You might not expect a god to care about line spacing, but Egypt was very fond of neat margins, and the gods kindly went along with it. The house of life, quiet as a big library, pretending to be a temple, lets in the last warm light and closes it carefully like a lid. A doorbolt clicks with that hollow wooden sound that always makes you feel suddenly safe. Lamps are trimmed to little moons, and a brazier begins its slow perfume of kiffy, the kind that smells like honey, raisins, wine, and well-behaved smoke. If you're still awake in a few minutes, you can follow this channel the way a reed follows water, or you can let the thought drift downstream and count as a subscription for the fish. Either way, we're settling in for the night shift of the scribes, which is less dramatic than it sounds, and more like folding a long letter while the world exhales. Papyrus sheets are stacked on a board, not too humid, not too crisp. You can hear them whisper against each other like little sandals. A boy brings a water clock, sets it on a low stool, and touches the surface so the droplet trembles into certainty. Someone taps a palette to test the red ink and the black. The room is not busy, it is deliberate. Every tool is a little god with an extremely modest job. A tablet is rubbed smooth with a sliver of limestone, and the scribe who owns it pen as a papyrus stem hair oiled into. Neatness breathes on the surface in a way that says tonight we'll be careful but not anxious. The grid is drawn first, always the grid. Faint squares and quiet lines, blue-gray from powdered azurite, so that words will walk straight and pictures will not wobble at the knees. He counts the boxes under his breath the way a priest counts beads. 4 for the title, 8 for the first spell, room left for the vignettes where boats drift and hands are raised, and the heart stands politely in court before at. It is pleasing to imagine that justice fits into rectangles. By the door, a tray holds reed pens sorted like date fronds, thick, thin, and that just right size that makes an S-pen feel like a cat's spine. If a pen splits, the scribe trims it with a stroke that is more whisper than cut. Red ink waits in a little cake for headings and dangerous names. Black, the comfortable color of narrators, sits in a shallow pool, heavy as the Nile after flood. On a shelf, a small wooden vase smiles his huge smile at the room, tongue out, legs bold. He is the patron of nothing going terribly wrong. The cat who belongs to no one and everyone patrols the threshold, pauses to consider a moth, decides against heroics, and curls on the warm lid of the ink water jar with the proprietary thump of a small deity on break. Tongues of paint stones wake with a little grind. The apprentice turns the muller in slow circles, crushing lamp black into gum and water, and the quiet has rhythm. A stone gliding, a shutter nibbling a draft, a single drop from the clepsydra stitching minutes to minutes. The scribe writes the title with ceremonious smallness, spell for going forth by day, red first, because beginnings should be slightly festive, then black, steady, and almost sleepy, each sign laid like a little brick in a wall that keeps anxiety outside. He leaves exactly the width of Matt's feather between lines. This is not a legal requirement. It is a courtesy to the eye. There is a superstition about smudges traveling like rumors, so he places a thin strip of scrap papyrus under his hand and moves it along as if sliding a raft under his wrist. You may notice that his breath has a metronome to it. In on 4 when he dips the pen, out on 6 when he pulls a word from the ink to the world. It is an excellent breathing exercise disguised as grammar. Every few lines he looks up, not for inspiration, just to remind his spine that it has a life beyond stooping. Lamps breathe with him, widening and narrowing like little lungs. Elsewhere in the room, a more senior scribe copies spell 125, the politely famous one where a heart is weighed against a feather, and the owner of both tries very hard to remember all the harmless things he did not do. The rubric, the red instruction text, says where to speak and where to merely be present, which is considerate of the tongue. Do not be hasty, the rubric suggests in a voice that has supervised many evenings. Do not name your neighbor's mistakes. The old scribe smiles at that, not because he remembers an exception, but because rubrics are kindly like grandparents who pretend not to notice. He draws the scale, tray, fulcrum, feather, and the small, attentive jackal-headed judge who writes everything down. The heart is always slightly rounder than you expect, as if it had been full of warm bread. He paints it with a wash thin as dew. The feather is thin enough to be audible. Somewhere under the long table, you can hear a pair of sandals being tidied against their owner. Exhale a soft little scrape that feels like the room saying, If the night had a hymn, it would be the hymn of small noises collaborating. Very late, almost invisibly, the room's humor wakes up. It does not giggle, it raises one eyebrow. A scribe mutters to his pen as if to a donkey that overthinks corners. The apprentice counts Eye of Horus fractions while measuring binder for ink. 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16, 1/32, 1/64. He recites them in the sing-song that bakers use for flour, because the same fractions weigh bread. It is an Egyptian delight that vision and pastry share mathematics. When he reaches the smallest slice, he says it softly, a breath more than a word, as if catching a fly under a cup. He is hungry in the way that makes your stomach a mild philosopher. Someone leaves 2 figs on the corner of his board and pretends not to be generous. The cat's ear swivels toward the figs and then away again, performing strict neutrality. Outside, the night air arranges a light draft through the high stone grills, and papyrus edges lift a little, then settle, like tiny fish taking a vote. If you are listening for jokes, the best ones are the straight lines in the hieratic script. The way they lean rightward, as if perpetually late to a meeting, they nevertheless will not rush. The gods respect this posture. The water clock ticks and drops. The boy tilts the vessel by a finger's width to keep the stream honest, then calls the hour in a voice designed to avoid startling anyone, including himself. It's a practical tone that temples everywhere keep in a jar. At the half-night mark, the brazier is fed with fresh pellets of kifi. Smoke rises with such good behavior that you feel it could carry a message across the ceiling without spilling a comma. The senior scribe pauses to repair a seam where 2 papyrus sheets meet. Wheat paste is mixed to the thickness of a good rumor. The edges are slightly rough on purpose so the fibers bite. He presses them together with the same patient pressure people use when encouraging bread dough that seems shy. A wooden ruler rests on top until the paste gathers itself. When ancient people talk about joining the 2 lands, they use this kind of gesture, and the gesture always works better than speeches. He has a small stamp that says Library of the House of Life, and he touches it to the margin with a kiss of red. It is not ownership, just a promise that the scroll will be visited again. Somewhere past midnight, the copying enters that tranquil stretch where eyes and hands become old friends who don't require conversation. The lines arrive as if already measured by cloud shadows. Ink finds the reed tip as if it knows its address. Even the mistakes are restful. A reverse sign, a missing bird, a hand momentarily pointed left when etiquette prefers right. The scribe circles it with a dot, writes the correction above, and absolutely no one panics. There is a little shelf of mistakes in every good room, and it is kept clean with kindness. The apprentice learns, tonight and forever, that gods are not impressed by panic. The senior scribe teaches the trick for dragons. When a difficult sign threatens to become ugly, draw it smaller. Ugliness is often a problem of ambition. He demonstrates with a graceful tiny vulture. It sits in the corner of the margin like a reserved ant and improves the whole sentence by behaving. Now come the pictures that turn anxious thoughts into scenery. The scribe paints a boat, long as a smile, with a cabin that looks like a polite box. He sets right inside and leaves a little room at the prow for Ciel and Hu. Their titles are written more confidently than their faces because titles, like door lintels, are easy to keep straight. Men coils along the gunwale, a ribbon with scales almost too delicate to see. Behind him, the crew of stars line the edge like dot points that decided to be helpful. Underneath, the river is 3 wavy lines that suggest infinity while quietly implying we will be done by morning. The gate names are written as if names could be good hinges. The scribe writes them twice, once in black for what will happen, once in red in case it gets complicated. The red stays cheerful even when it is warning you. This is a very Egyptian approach to hazard signage. It would be fun to say the night flies, but it does not. It strolls, pausing to look into jars. The senior scribe cleans the reed tips by drawing them across a fragment of broken pot that already holds a museum of old lines. The rough ceramic tightens the fibers. He re-wets the pens, touches them to the palette, and there is a sound like a mouse thinking. When he gets up to stretch, the room simply retunes around his absence, the way a reed bed sways, and decides not to feel dramatic about it. He steps out to the courtyard to rinse his hands at a basin whose rim is cool and whose water has 1 moon floating in it. Above the wall, the stars that are working the night shift look over like neighbors, exchanging a dignified nod. A breeze tips a palm frond to the same beat as the water clock. The scribe comes back and smelling faintly of palm and evaporated water, which is a kind of blessing that does not require a priest. Toward the last third of the night, small rituals that belong to scribes and nobody else begin. The old man draws a very tiny bass on the back of the scroll where it will roll inward and face the text. For good mood, he explains to the apprentice, which is a theological position. He lays a strand of clean linen across the painted boat's prow so it will dry without shine. He reminds the boy to write the colophon at the end date, place, who copied, who checked, what was used. Colophons are the House of Life's autobiography written in the margins. Sometimes when the scribe feels bold in a gentle way, he adds, written with a good read and a happy hour. It's not bragging, it's civic weather. He tells a story about a night when the ink cake cracked straight across and the cat put a paw on it as if sealing a treaty, after which the scroll turned out to be strangely accurate about the sunrise. The apprentice laughs silently because the best parts of the story are the ways it does not pretend to be instructive. Because Egypt carries a memory like a basket, other rooms and other cities lean over this one. In Abydos, a similar copyist blinks against resinous lamp smoke. In Thebes, a scribe notices a moth wing pasted to the edge of a sign for west, and decides it is an omen of nothing at all. In tiny town temples, the text is shorter, the paint cheaper, and the attention just as careful. Someone in Saqqara experiments with a greener malachite for the wedget eyes and the vignettes. It stains his thumb for a week, and he is pleased. A girl who maps walls for her father. A team of draftsmen practices dovetail joints and chalk on the floor because she likes how boxes fit. None of them are in a hurry. All of them have learned the rule that makes long work gentle. Pause before the breath, not after. If you try it now, you will discover why. The pause before lets you set down the pen inside your chest. The water clock empties itself with the dignified smirk of a task completed. The boy pours what is left into a clean bowl so time can turn back into water without leaving a residue. The lamps are pinched and then coaxed up again with a bit of wick, the way long sentences are pinched and expanded by commas. The room smells of soot, glue, and a sweetness that has given up its name. The apprentice runs a palm softly along the main column of text, not touching ink, only measuring straightness with his skin. He reports with relief that the measures did not wander. The old scribe nods as if he already knew. He always does. He takes up the last line and gives the scroll its goodbye. There is a phrase that many colophons share, may be useful, and it sits on the page like bread still warm. Almost morning now. The text is rolled around a cedar staff as thin as a thumb and tied with a linen ribbon that gives a little dust of flax to the air. A clay seal is pressed modestly. Another scribe stands nearby and reads back a handful of lines at random to see if words arrive where expected. They do. On a side table, a page from earlier lies drying, a glossary of signs that look similar but should not be confused. The page is an act of kindness toward future eyes. Someone yawns in that way that sounds like a door easing open. The cat wakes and stretches with a spine so articulate that you wonder if it was the model for the hieroglyph of a cat. No one writes this thought down. Not every observation seeks immortality. At dawn's first pale rumor, the temple comes back to itself with the soft scuff of brooms. The scribes rub a little fragrant oil on their fingers to nudge the inkus dryness into gentle compliance before rolling. The scroll is set on a low tray and carried to the inner room where the god as statue waits in its cabinet. The priest on duty nods without words. He knows this dance, the pyrus in, prayer out, both of them made of breath and fibers. An offering of a small loaf and a cup of beer is placed near the cabinet, because ideas eat too. The scribe does not kneel dramatically. He adjusts the ribbon, straightens the tray, and steps back. The work is always offered by tiding. Somewhere outside, a bark on the real river bumps a wooden key and reminds everyone that schedules exist even for light. When the room is empty, the house of life cools like bread after the oven. The apprentices stack boards and wash pallets with the gentle ferocity of people who know that next time will be better if now is thorough. The old scribe returns the base to his shelf so the next one can borrow that grin. He picks a single reed from the jar, a reed that looks promising but not glamorous, and sets it apart, which is the beginning of tomorrow's good mood. He makes a very small oath, the kind that keeps rather than wobbles, one clean line tomorrow before speaking to anyone. It's a practical charm against stray opinions. He closes the door on the way out and listens to the bolt find its socket. That sound is an amen all by itself. We walk with him across the courtyard where the first squares of some way are being set out like tiles. Somewhere a baker is cutting dough with the same Eye of Horus fractions the apprentice recited, and somewhere a gardener waters figs by counting verses. A woman balances a basket and hums a hymn that has forgotten it as a hymn. Nothing has been accomplished that the world will call a triumph. A spell was copied, a seam was pressed, a tiny vulture improved a sentence by behaving. This is how Egypt moves its days forward, with tools that expect to meet tomorrow. If your eyes are heavy, it is not only the kifi. Words of orderly width have a weight, and they persuade lids to fold. You can keep listening as long as you like. The house of life has an infinite number of quiet rooms, each carrying a different breath, and the work will continue exactly at the speed of careful. Before sleep takes the reed from your hand, you might promise one small line of your own at dawn, or you might let the promise roll itself up like a scroll and rest behind the ribs where Mutt's feather keeps a narrow golden margin, and where Base smiles without checking the time. Either way, the ink dries, the water becomes water again, and the story could go on like this forever, because that is what a good merchant does. It waits, and it keeps waiting, and it cradles the next word whenever you arrive. You might not expect the quietest place in Egypt to belong to the god of writing, but the House of Thoth after dark is exactly that kind of surprise. It is a temple that behaves like a library that has decided to become a bedroom. Lamps burn low, oil making a soft, patient sound, and the ibis statues watch from the walls as if they are pretending to read the shadows. Somewhere outside, the Nile moves as usual, but in here, time slows down to the pace of a reed pen crossing a page. If you find yourself still awake in a few minutes, you can decide to follow this channel or not. The scribes of Thoth are very polite and will happily record either choice in a margin and then forget about it. For now, you are simply here in the doorway, watching the last visitors leave as the doorkeeper slides the bolt with the same careful rhythm he uses for everything else. At night, the great hall becomes a nest of small lights. Each lamp is tilted exactly the way the temple register says it should be tilted, so that the soot on the ceiling forms neat, matching crescents over every column. A sleepy apprentice goes around with a bronze ladle of oil topping them up the way. Someone might water plants before bed, speaking to each flame under his breath, as if it were a fussy cat that prefers its bowl. Filled just so. On the central table, a row of water clocks stands like little round guardians. They drip with gentle stubbornness, marking out the hours in a language that only the temple learns. Every time a cup is full, a scribe will later note that the hour has passed. So even time itself is treated like a slightly shy visitor who must be coaxed to sign the guest book. The walls are covered in texts and star maps that Thoth himself is said to have dictated on a very meticulous evening. Here are the decans, the star groups that rise one after another through the night, each little cluster like its own tiny neighborhood in the sky. Their names are written in tidy vertical columns, never in a hurry, as if being a star is just a very long shift on a very predictable schedule. The scribes know which group should be where at any particular hour, and sometimes when the air is. Especially still, one of them will look up through the open roof and check on them, the way you might glance at a clock in the middle of a long meeting just to see if the hands are still behaving. In the side chamber, palettes and reed pens wait on shelves sorted by color and purpose. There are the black ink reeds for everyday things, like lists of offerings or polite letters to neighboring temples. There are red ink reeds reserved for gods, names warnings, and the occasional, "Do not move this jar." A little bowl of water sits nearby for rinsing tips, its surface dotted with faint halos of color where yesterday's words dissolved and went quietly back into being nothing in particular. The god Thoth is praised as Lord of the Sacred Library, but his temple really runs on these very ordinary tools. Chalk for guidelines, wax for sealing, string for tying everything up neatly at the end of the day. The immortality of knowledge depends, quite literally, on spare string. Every night, when the last sunlight leaves the courtyard and the sky turns that heavy blue that thinks about becoming black, a small group of night scribes gathers in the hall. They are not very dramatic people. Their great duty is to watch time go by in a dignified fashion. One of them reads out the date and hour according to the civil calendar, another corrects him according to the lunar calendar, and a third, who is responsible for keeping track of festivals and awkward exceptions, sighs and reminds them of an intercalary day that technically belongs to no month at all. There is a brief, quiet argument over where to write that down, because the papyrus does not have a box labeled time that is officially important but doesn't fit anywhere. They solve it by drawing a little extra margin and placing it there, which is also how many problems in life are solved. Once the date is safely trapped on the page, the work of the night begins. At regular intervals, a scribe goes up onto the flat roof and lies on his back to watch the decans rise. He notes which star group is coming up over the eastern wall and calls the name down to the hall below. His voice is not particularly loud. It doesn't need to be. The stone carries sound like a gentle mail service, delivering words to where they need to go and then letting them fall asleep in the cracks. Downstairs, another scribe writes the name of the Titian, the hour, and the small comments the temple has agreed to keep. Any strange cloud shapes, any unusual lights, the number of dogs barking in the street. These details may not be cosmically important, but the priests say the god of writing likes footnotes. Around the water clocks, there's a quiet choreography. Each clock is a large stone or ceramic vessel with a narrow hole at the bottom, shaped so the water level falls at a predictable rate. Inside, lines and numbers are carved up the wall, like a vertical to-do list for the night. As the water drops, it touches each mark in turn, nodding to it and moving on. The responsible priest checks them with a lamp and occasionally adjusts the floating stick that helps him judge the level. If the water seems ahead or behind, he notes it in the record. The clepsydra hurried slightly, or the clepsydra lingered, the way you might say the Nile is early or the cat is late. It is never the priest's fault. Time itself is gently reminded to keep up. Midway through the night, when even the dust seems tired enough to settle in neat, even layers, the gods' animal forms begin their particular patrols. Somewhere in the dark, Thoth is imagined as an ibis, long beak glinting, stepping between the stars on legs as thin as ink strokes. Elsewhere, he is a baboon seated upright, lecturing the moon with the serious patience of someone explaining the same thing yet again to a very bright but absent-minded student. In the temple, little statues of these forms keep watch. One small baboon figure is seated beside the main water clock, his stone eyes fixed on the dripping stream. The scribes joke that if time misbehaves, the baboon will file a complaint, but so far the water has never tried to argue. There is a cabinet where important scrolls live, tied with fresh string and labeled in clear, slightly sleepy handwriting. Here's the calendar of festivals with its pattern of fasts and feasts that gives the year a heartbeat. Here is the register counting how many times Re'e's boat has been praised in this particular hall, with little tick marks that look like a child's careful doodles. There is a scroll that lists every major repair made to the temple since a certain pharaoh thought the doorway should be taller. Another keeps track of which priest owes whom a jar of beer for covering an extra watch. Thoth is the god of divine accounts, but he apparently does not mind if human favors are shelved in the same cabinet, as long as they're written legibly. Occasionally, a visitor arrives late, breathless with some concern that could not wait for morning, but also, inconveniently, could absolutely wait for morning. The gatekeeper listens, decides whether this is a matter for the day priests or the night scribes, and usually points them toward a small table where they may dictate a simple petition. The scribes prefer short requests. "Let my son pass his exams" is fine. "Please rearrange the destiny of everyone involved in my neighbor as argument" is politely shortened in translation. Egyptian gods are powerful, but even they appreciate a specific, manageable sentence. After writing the petition, the scribe sprinkles a bit of sand on the ink to dry it, folds the papyrus, and hands it over with the same calm as someone passing a blanket. "Leave this on the altar," he might say, "and let the god think about it while you sleep." The hours glide on. Eventually, the temple's inner noise settles into a handful of steady sounds. The drip of the water clocks, the faint scratching of reed on papyrus, the tiny pop when a bubble escapes from an oil lamp. Outside, the scenery barely changes. The Nile is a dark band with a silver edge. Palm trees group themselves into silhouettes that look like they, too, are discussing the relative importance of footnotes. Somewhere in the city, a dog barks at nothing in particular, which is one of the constants of the universe. The scribes mark the time of the barking down in the margin of the hour record, then glance at each other as if to say, "Very well, the dog has contributed to the archives again." As the third quarter of the night drifts in, someone brings in a tray of bread heels and leftover dates from the day's offerings. These are shared in small, absent-minded bites, crumbs falling onto papyrus that is, fortunately, already dry. One scribe has a habit of straightening those crumbs into neat lines before brushing them away, as if there is a correct order even for the way bread rests on sacred texts. Another keeps track of how many times in a week each scribe says, "May Thoth guide my hand," after accidentally smudging a line. It is a gentle sort of statistics, one that never makes it into official registers, but provides a low, comforting rhythm of human error and forgiveness. Sometimes on especially quiet nights when the moon is thin and the air feels like it has been carefully folded, an elder priest will tell a story to the younger scribes. He might talk about the time when Thoth supposedly added extra days to the year so that Nut could give birth to her children without breaking the schedule of creation. According to the tale, the god of writing played a game of chance with the moon and won enough light to make 5 new days, which he then added to the calendar like bonus pages at the back of a book. The older priest always pauses here to tap the festival scroll and point out that the extra days are still technically marked as outside of the year, which explains certain small administrative headaches. Even divine improvisation, it seems, leaves clerical residue. The scribes like this story because it is about time misbehaving in a very polite way. The year does not rebel. It simply accepts 5 additional evenings and carries on. When they copy this myth, they linger a little over the lines that describe Thoth laughing softly as he writes the new days into being. They imagine him sitting much like they do now, cross-legged, bent over a table, except that his words immediately become reality instead of needing to be carried to an office first. In their versions, they sometimes add a quiet note in the margin. Let each day be written like this, carefully and without hurry. The god probably doesn't mind the editorializing. Toward the last portion of the night, the star groups that marked the beginning of the shift slowly drift down toward the western horizon. The roof observer lies on his back again, hood pulled tight against the chill, and watches them move. He notes that one particular deccan seems a little dimmer than usual, and makes a modest remark about dust or thin clouds. There is no panic. Stars are allowed to have tired evenings. Down below, the final lines of the night's record are filled in. The water clocks are nearly empty now, their carved markings exposed like ribs, each one having been touched by the falling level of water, and thus, in a sense, visited by time. As Dawn begins to think about existing somewhere beyond the eastern hills, the temple stirs in anticipation. Lamps are trimmed one last time. The oil in the ladle is almost gone, which is a good sign. It means the measurements were correct. The scribes roll up the finished scrolls and tie them with fresh string, marking the date and the line of stars that kept watch. They stack them on a shelf where the records of hundreds of other nights already doze, forming a soft, papery weight that presses gently past. It is a kind of sedimentary rock made of evenings. Before the day priests arrive, there is a final small ceremony that belongs mostly to habit. One of the scribes goes to the image of Thoth and reads aloud a simple formulaic thanks for ink that flowed, for reeds that did not split, for water clocks that behaved, for stars that rose according to their appointment. He ends with a tiny unauthorized addition, and for those who listened, meaning not only the god, but perhaps also the stray cat in the courtyard, the baboon statue by the clock, and anyone anywhere who has ever let their thoughts slow down, enough to drift with the drip of time. The prayer is not in any official manual, but it has been repeated so many times that it might as well be. The first streaks of pale light begin to slip into the sky, and from somewhere, a rooster decides to take credit for the entire event. In the house of Thoth, the scribes begin tidying up, shaking sand from the tables, stacking pallets, capping ink pots. They do these things with the deliberate calm of people who know they will be back tonight to undo and redo the same motions. That is the quiet promise of this place. The work is never really finished, and that is strangely comforting. There will always be another line to write, another hour to note, another star to glance at and nod to. When you imagine leaving the temple, you feel the faint warmth of the impending sun on the stone under your feet. Behind you, the doorway of the library closes with a soft, practiced sound. Inside, the night's records rest. Outside, the city wakes, unaware that its dreams have just been carefully filed. The god of writing, somewhere between bird and baboon and something more, lets the last drops fall from the water clocks and turns a mental page. And if your eyes are still open, you can picture the scribes settling into their own beds, ears still echoing with dripping and distant stars, as the long, slow sentence of Egyptian time continues, comfortably unfinished into another day. You might not expect anyone to take notes on your dreams with the same seriousness as tax records, but in Egypt there was at least one hall where sleep itself was treated like paperwork. Imagine that you are walking very slowly through the cool corridor of the House of Life, the temple library, long after the last market stall has been folded away. The torches have been pinched to a low orange, just enough light to keep the floor from becoming a rumor. Somewhere outside, the Nile turns over in its sleep, but here the loudest sound is the dry whisper of palm fibers brushing papyrus. This is the hour when the so-called pillow scribes begin their shift, which is a gentle way of saying they stay up late so that everyone else can dream in peace. If you are still awake in a few minutes, you can decide whether to follow them, or you can simply roll over and let their ink do the work for you. Either way, nobody is keeping attendance. A sleepy priest slides open a wooden chest and brings out a stack of dream books. They are not storybooks exactly, more like a very old, very sacred version of a "if you dream of X, then Y will happen" guide, neatly arranged in vertical columns. Each line begins the same way, like a lullaby with bureaucratic rhythm. If a man dreams that he sees, if a woman dreams that she eats, if a person dreams that they are walking north while carrying 3 loaves... The phrases go on and on, tiny staircases of possibilities for the night to climb up and down. The scribes, leaning on their elbows, run their fingers just above the ink, not touching it, as if the words are still drying after centuries. They know the patterns extremely well. One of them jokes, in a voice soft enough not to wake the statues, that there are more official predictions about bread in these scrolls than about love. No one argues. In Egypt, bread wins that contest very quietly. You settle against a column and watch as the hall prepares itself for incoming dreams. A servant places a water clock, one of those deep stone bowls, with an inner scale on a low table. Every few heartbeats, a drop falls from a tiny hole, counting the minutes of the night in steady silver beads. It is not precise in the modern sense, but it is regular, and regular is good enough for sleep. Beside it, a small dish of black ink waits, thick as melted dates, and next to that a dish of red ink for the important bits. The warnings, the "maybe don't do that tomorrow" notes. A scribe yawns and uses the end of his reed pen to scratch an itch on his cheek. Then he straightens the papyrus and glances at the door. Soon, people who have promised to sleep in the temple will be lying on mats in the courtyard, under stars that look like tiny shell inlays punched into dark stone. Their dreams will wander, and priests will listen, and everything will be written down with patient, repetitive strokes. When the first dreamers arrived earlier in the evening, they brought small offerings, a cone of incense, a jug of beer, sometimes just a single onion wrapped in a strip of linen like a vegetable mummy. The logic is simple enough. If you want the gods to visit you in your dreams and maybe leave a helpful hint, you do not show up empty-handed. Now they are already asleep outside, in the open air where the breeze from the river can find them. Some lie near statues of Imhotep, the architect who became a healer. Others curl near images of Thoth, who understands writing, the moon, and people who stay up too late. A priest walks among them, quietly adjusting pillows that are really folded cloaks, making sure nobody has rolled too far away from the protective circle of torches. From where you sit, the courtyard looks like a carefully scattered handful of shells, each shell breathing in and out, wrapped in its private story. Back in the hall, the scribes begin the slow game of waiting. They are not supposed to wake anyone, only to listen when sleepers murmur or shift, when someone sits up suddenly and begins to whisper what they have seen. There's a small, well-practiced choreography for this. When a dreamer stirs, a watcher outside gives a tiny clap, just once. Inside, The nearest scribe looks up, checks the water line on the clock to note the hour, and reaches for a fresh strip of papyrus. It is, in a very ancient way, like timestamping an email, except that nobody expects a reply within the hour. The dream will be written in present tense, as though it is happening forever. He sees a crocodile made of gold. She walks through a gate and finds her sandals on fire, but her feet are cool. He receives 3 loaves from a man without a head. The phrases arrive half asleep, tangled, and the scribe gently straightens them, never adding, never correcting, only smoothing them enough for the morning to understand. Sometimes a dream is so long that it arrives in several installments. The scribe will pause, pen held lightly between his fingers, while the dreamer lies back down, muttering something about bluefish or upside-down boats. Then, when the sleeper surfaces again, the story continues exactly where it left off. It is surprisingly organized for something happening entirely inside someone's head. The scribes like to say that the gods respect a good narrative line even in dreams, but they say it quietly because they are also aware that some dreams are simply about being late for work in sandals that do not match. When that happens, they still write it all down. Later, the dream book will calmly inform the dreamer that such a vision means good news from a distant relative, or profit in barley, which is a polite way of saying the universe is not especially worried about your footwear. As the night deepens, the hall shifts into its second, softer scene. The first excitement of settling everything in place has faded into a thick, steady calm. Ra's solar boat, if you imagine it, is somewhere under the western horizon now, moving through caverns where snakes and fire and strange gatekeepers ask their slow questions. Here, in the temple, the only gatekeepers are the scribes and their dream books, and their questions are very modest. Did you see yourself eating or being eaten? Was the water in your dream flowing toward the north or the south? Were the sandals yours, or did you recognize them from somewhere else? They ask these things in low voices, as if they are discussing someone's grocery list, which in a sense they are. Dreams are just the night's shopping, gathering images and laying them out on a table until morning chooses what to keep. In one corner, an older scribe with a beard like unraveling flax is in charge of the strange but not urgent category. If a dream involves floating jars, talking fish, or people with ears of barley, the younger scribes quietly slide those reports toward him. He reads them with great seriousness, nodding as though the barley-eared person is a neighbor he has met before. Then he flips through a separate scroll that contains the more unusual entries. After a while, he hums softly and writes something like good harvest or health for the household, because nearly everything, if you turn it gently, can be translated into those 2 blessings. When a dream is truly impossible to match, he sometimes writes, in very small signs at the edge, "The god knows." It is a professional way of shrugging, and the gods do not seem to mind. Now and then, a breeze from the courtyard brings in a strand of someone's muttering. One sleeper insists he is on Ra's boat itself, handing cups of cool water to the crew while they sail past caverns full of quiet, obedient snakes. Another whispers that she is standing in the Hall of Maat, watching feathers fall in slow motion over a line of hearts. The priest who is listening does not interrupt to explain that hearts do not actually line up like clay pots in the afterlife. He just notes down the dream, nods, and adds a mark from the dream book that says, essentially, you will feel lighter soon. If you have ever woken up from a nightmare and then realized that nothing bad has happened in the real world, you have felt the same effect. The Egyptians simply gave it a line number and a place in the filing cabinet. Sometime around the middle of the night, the water clock is refilled. This is a very quiet ceremony, almost shy. A novice carries in a fresh jug, tips it, and watches the level rise, careful not to splash the ink nearby. The scribes glance up, not because anything surprising is happening, but because it is the one significant adjustment the night requires. Time, like the Nile, must be topped up now and again. Once the last droplet has settled, work resumes. The reeds scratch gently. One scribe takes a moment to doodle a tiny bass figure at the margin of a particularly anxious dream, not as art, but as a little guardian. Later, he will probably trim it away when the scroll is stored, but for now, the squat, big-headed god stands there with his tongue out, frightening away whatever shadows tried to sneak into that dream. It is small, unofficial magic, the kind you do for yourself when nobody is looking. By the time you feel your own eyelids growing heavier just from watching all this, the temple has entered its third scene, the slow sorting of what the night has provided. The first rush of dreams has tapered off. The courtyard sleepers are now deep in quieter cycles, and fewer of them wake enough to speak. Inside, the scribes begin to reread what they have written. They do not edit exactly, but they organize. Scrolls are grouped by the god to whom the dream was addressed, by the type of question asked: health, work, children, travel, and by an invisible category called how worried the person looked when they paid the offering. Dreams that came with large jars of honey or fine linen get the same care as dreams that came with a single onion, but the scribes still remember. Worry has a way of leaving a crease in the papyrus of the face. There is a kind of gentle humor in their conversations, the way people whisper jokes in a library. One scribe reads out, he dreams he is eating an entire goose alone. Another replies, without missing a beat, interpretation, he will have to share. They smile quietly, then dutifully check the official book, which might say something entirely different, like increase in property. The difference does not bother them. The dream book is a tool, not a prison. What matters is that the dreamer will go home with a sentence that feels like solid ground. Tomorrow, when the sun burns the mist off the river, someone will stand in front of them and ask, eyes half embarrassed, "So, what does it mean?" And they will answer in a way that lets the person take at least one slow, deeper breath. Every now and then a more philosophical dream drifts in. A man dreams that he is the water clock, slowly emptying grain by grain, except that it is neither water nor grain, but tiny hieroglyphs falling through his fingers. The scribe who records this pauses for a long time, staring at his own ink-stained hand. For a moment you can see him wondering if he too is simply a vessel that the words of others pass through. Then he writes the dream down as usual, and assigns it a very practical interpretation about long life and steady work. Because even in moments of existential doubt, morning still comes, and people still need something they can pin to the wall of their day. The grand questions, like Ra's nightly journey, can continue elsewhere, between the stars and the duet. In the late part of the night, the temple feels like a ship floating in a sea of sleeping houses. Outside the walls, dogs turn in their dreams. Fishermen mutter about tangled nets. Children sprawl diagonally across mats in ways that will give them entertaining neck pains tomorrow. Inside, the scribes keep their small island of order. They stretch their backs, drink a little water, maybe nibble a leftover date if no one is watching. One of them wonders aloud what it would be like if someone took notes on their dreams as well, and the others laugh under their breath. The idea of the dream about writing dreams about dreams is dismissed as too messy even for the gods. Still, you can sense that somewhere, in some future century, someone will find this very funny. At last the fourth, quietest scene arrives, the slow joining of night to dawn. The sky outside the high windows begins to dilute from ink black to something more like watered wine. The water clock drips with a slightly different sound now, because the air is changing. It is a detail you notice only if you have been awake for far too long. One by one, the scribes tie off the ends of their scrolls with thin cords. Each dream report is labeled with the dreamer's name, the approximate hour, around the second hour of the night, near the fifth, and the deity invoked. The script is smaller here, compact but neat. If the dream was especially vivid, they may add a discreet red mark so that the day priest will know to treat it with extra gravity. The ink shines faintly when the first low ray of sunlight comes in, making every word look briefly, accidentally important. In the courtyard, someone stirs and sits up, blinking at the sky in confusion, as if surprised that the world has continued without them. One of the priests goes out to greet them, offering a cup of water and a piece of bread. The dreamer begins to describe what they remember, now that the dream is slipping away like fish through fingers. The priest listens and occasionally glances down at the scroll already written, checking for matches, gently steering the conversation toward the version that will be easiest to live with. It is not deception, exactly. It is more like smoothing a crumpled sheet so that it will lie flat under the weight of the day. You can almost hear Mayat, goddess of balance, approving from somewhere near the temple roof, where the first light is turning sandstone edges into thin lines of gold. By the time the sun lifts fully above the houses, the night's dreams have been moved into their places. Some will be stored in the House of Life, rolled and stacked alongside medical recipes, hymns, and instructions for building proper doorways. Others, dealing with more everyday concerns, will be summarized verbally and left to fade in the minds of both priest and dreamer. A few will travel further, carried to scribes in other towns as curiosities or case studies. Somewhere, a cousin of one of tonight's pillow scribes is probably writing a letter about how many people this season are dreaming of overflowing granaries, which everyone agrees is a good sign for barley and perhaps for tax collection. The gods, if they read these reports, rarely send a memo back. You may find, as you watch this gentle bureaucracy packing itself away, that the details blur pleasantly. The sound of reed pens recedes into the hum of morning insects. The dream books are slid back into their chests, their edges worn smooth by countless fingers. Someone snuffs the last of the Kifi incense, and the smoke rises like a question that no longer needs an answer. Ra's boat, somewhere above the horizon, has already exchanged its night crew for the bright daytime one, trading caverns for clouds. The pillow scribes, finally released, step out into the wide courtyard light, eyes blinking, bodies moving with the slow care of people whose thoughts are still half in the dark. One of them yawns and says that tonight will bring more dreams, and more after that, an endless stream of strange little stories waiting for ink. He says it without urgency, as if he has all the time in the world, which, in this moment between night and day, feels quietly true. And if you are still listening, if your own thoughts are still tracing the shapes of those ancient hieroglyphs written in the margins of sleep, you can let them drift now. Let the water clock in your chest drip a little slower. Let the solar boat in your imagination sail on without you for a while. The scribes will keep watch over the dreams. Ra will keep his timetable. The Nile will remember the route. You do not have to file anything or interpret anything or decide whether a goose in a dream is good or bad news. You can simply lie back like one more sleeper in the courtyard and allow the quiet paperwork of the night to continue without your help until even the thought of ink dissolves into the soft, unrecorded dark. You might expect that the dangerous hour of night, the one with the great serpent and the knives and all the heroic bits, would be the moment everyone remembers. But in the quiet accounting of Ra's midnight timetable, the part the priest truly loved was the one that came after the danger, when the boat of the sun needed housekeeping. It is hard to panic while watching gods perform maintenance. Somewhere in the third stretch of darkness, when the caverns widen again, and the echo and the fear both run out of breath, the solar bark glides into a kind of cosmic workshop. The river slows. The stars seem to lean back. The crew begins, very calmly, to tidy eternity. They do not announce it with trumpets. There is no triumphant fanfare. No, we beat the chaos snake, like and subscribe. If you are still awake, hovering just above sleep like a feather floating above your pillow, you simply notice that the sound of the water changes. It laps instead of hisses. The reeds along the bank straighten, like scribes who have just remembered their posture. The prow of the boat, which was so busy a moment ago slicing through shadows, now drifts forward in a thoughtful, unhurried line. Someone touches your shoulder, maybe in your imagination, and you understand. This is the hour when everything is gently fixed. The first repairs are always done with words, because in Egypt words are more precise than nails. A priest, or something that feels like the memory of a priest, kneels at the front of the bark. He does not bring tools, only a small jar of water and a whisper. The prow has gathered invisible scratches from the narrow place where Apophis refused to move. These are not dramatic battle scars. They are the tiny scuffs of resistance, the way the world rubs back when change squeezes through. The priest dips his fingers into the jar, flicks 3 drops across the wood, and begins to recite names. Not the big famous ones, but the long, dusty names that sound like shelf labels in the divine storeroom. Each name is a dab of paint on the surface of time. The words run along the grain like fresh varnish. You cannot see any color change, but the prow shivers very slightly, like a cat that has just been brushed the right way. The god Siao, who is perception itself, stands nearby and squints at the timber. Seal is the one who notices everything, the divine version of that part of your brain that still hears the fridge humming at 2 in the morning. He tilts his head, counting scratches that are no longer there, and makes a small note on the invisible tablet only he can read. One more night where the boat remembered how to be a boat. No leaks in reality yet. He seems mildly pleased, which for a cosmic principle is the equivalent of a standing ovation. Beside him is Hu, the personification of authoritative speech, who is basically the universe's editor. While Ciel watches, Hu listens. He listens to each line of the spell, weighs it like a sentence that might need one less adjective, and quietly adjusts the phrasing round the edges. Maybe last night they said strong prow, and tonight he prefers steady prow. Strong sounds like it might be required to do something heroic again. Steady just needs to keep going, which is exactly the energy this hour is aiming for. If you have ever rewritten a text message 3 times to make it sound both honest and not too dramatic, you already understand whose job. The boat moves slowly as this proofreading of reality goes on. Every plank is stroked with syllables, every seam tuned by vowel sounds. The crew leans against the railings, not from exhaustion anymore, but in the pleasant slump that comes when a task is finished, and the only thing left is tidying up. Mehen, the great protective serpent who wrapped around Ra during the narrow passage, begins to uncoil himself from the god's golden form. There is nothing aggressive in the movement. It is the slow unwinding of a scarf from around someone's shoulders when the evening chill has passed. Coil by coil, Mehen slides along the deck, his scales making the soft rasp of sand poured into a jar. He checks the rail as he goes, nudging it with his body. If a board complains with a tiny creak, he presses his side against it, and the pressure of his scales smooths the sound away. One patch of gilding has dulled where the glare of serpent dark was thickest. Mahan pauses there, lifts his head, and gives the spot a patient snake-like look, the kind of look a craftsman gives to a tool that has clearly done its work but could use a bit of oil. Somehow the gold brightens. Maybe the priest has noticed and murmur-painted it from his place at the prow. Maybe my hand's attention itself is the polish. The myths are vague on the exact mechanism, as myths often are when it comes to practical cleaning. All around you, the atmosphere of the boat changes from tension to routine. Earlier, every gaze was pinned to the river ahead, to the place where the darkness thickened and the knife flashes happened. Now people remember they have hands. They begin to straighten ropes, though nothing was really tangled. One god sits cross-legged to retie his sandals, pulling each knot as if tying the hours themselves into a neater bow. Another inspects a row of small copper fastenings along the gunnel, tapping each one twice with a fingernail. Somewhere, a jar lid but nearly rattled loose is turned calmly until it clicks. It is cosmic quality control, but with the gentle mood of a late-night kitchen after the dishes are done. On the banks of the underworld river, the caverns seem to imitate this calm. Rock faces smooth out. Stalagmites that previously lurked like teeth now resemble the polite handles of cupboards. Every now and then, you glimpse a gate through which the bark has already passed. Its guardians, who hours ago were reciting speeches and checking lists of passengers, are now performing their own quiet repairs. One adjusts the feather in his crown. Another reshelves a scroll, making sure the label faces outward. The most alarming thing any of them does is yawn. The terror of the night shifts looks different up close. Up close, it looks like people at work carefully resetting the world before morning. If you notice your own body copying them, that is entirely in character. Muscles that were secretly braced from the earlier tension start to unclench. Shoulders drift away from ears. Jaw remembers it does not need to hold the sky in place. You might even, like Mihan, feel the impulse to uncoil from whatever tight position you were using to stay awake. The gods will not mind if, as they update their spells, you update your pillow position. Their schedule includes space for this. Somewhere in the invisible scribal nodes in the margins of the Book of Gates, Sia has probably written, "Side sleepers may rotate now." In the middle of the deck, Ray himself stands very still. This part of the night is not about him winning or losing. It is about everything around him remembering its shape. The solar disk above his head hums faintly, like a lamp turned down to its lowest kind of setting. The light that earlier had to fight through coils of shadow now pulls quietly at his feet, outlining small chips in the floorboards and very tiny grains of dust. It is an unflattering light, the kind in which you notice you should really sweep. The crew notices. A young attendant picks up a palm broom and begins to sweep the same patch of deck again and again. There's very little actual dust in the realm of the dead, but the movement itself is a spell. From time to time, the helmsman checks the current with a lazy stroke of the steering oar. The river feels content, like someone who has finally sent a difficult email and can now enjoy the quiet ping of replies arriving slowly, one by one. The water clock in a distant temple above ground continues ticking, marking off the hour that belongs to repairs. Priests in white linen, who earlier were tense and bright-eyed, now have softened faces. They know the myth says this is still the domain of danger, technically, but everyone also knows that after the serpent has been handled, the paperwork must be done. No ritual is complete without a little administrative aftercare. As the boat moves, small ripples of sound travel from stern to prow. A lashing of rope here, the creak of leather there, the rustle of linen as a god adjusts his cloak. Each noise is followed by another sound that answers it and makes it smaller. When the rope creaks, a hand pats it. When the leather sighs, someone smooths it flat. There is a feedback loop of reassurance. Even the stars overhead appear to dim and brighten like breathing. If you listen closely, the pattern is simple. Detail, response, quiet. Almost like the structure of a bedtime story, or like the way your own thoughts notice some lingering worry, answer it with a small adjustment of the blanket, and then let it go. At one point, Sayal walks slowly from one end of the bark to the other, running his fingers along the carved hieroglyphs on the inner rail. These are the travel logs of earlier nights, the carved minutes of centuries of crossings. He notices a sign where later hands added a small correction, turning one symbol into another with a neat extra stroke. Perhaps a scribe once miswrote a star's name, and no one wanted that paperwork error to echo through eternity. Ciel smiles, almost invisibly. The willingness to fix small mistakes is, he thinks, a kind of worship. If you have ever woken in the middle of the night to change a single word in a document that no one else will read as closely as you do, and the ancient priests are secretly in the same union, who follows behind him, murmuring tiny updates to the travel liturgy. He is not ambitious tonight. No new doctrines, no bold theological revisions. Just small edits in the margins. An extra "may it endure" here, a gentler verb there. In one line, he replaces destroy with dissolve. Destruction is noisy. Dissolution is what happens to sugar in warm tea or to sharp edges in a dream. As he whispers the new version, the dark around the bow behaves accordingly. It does not shatter or scream. It simply thins like ink brushed with more water until you can see the quiet walls of the cavern beyond. Meanwhile, Mahan has almost completed his inspection circuit. Returning to the stern, he loops himself once more around Ra, but more loosely now. There is a casualness to the coil, the way a cat curls at the foot of a bed instead of across your face. His body forms a low railing of scales that you could, in theory, lean on. If some stray thought or lingering fear tried to climb aboard, it would find itself quietly redirected back into the river. The protection is still there. It just looks like relaxation instead of armor. This is one of the small secrets of the night journey. Sometimes safety feels like effort, and sometimes it feels like letting your spine soften into the mattress. On certain nights, the myth says, the crew adds small improvements to the boat during this hour. A new bead is tied to a tassel near the helm, carved with a protective eye. A tiny bronze nail, forgotten during some long ago restoration, is finally hammered into place with 2 careful taps. Someone hangs a fresh strip of linen over a rough spot in the mast where hands tend to brush. None of these upgrades are dramatic. They are just kindnesses extended to the future. The next time the bark squeezes through a difficult hour, a hand will find that soft linen without thinking, and the comfort will be there waiting, paid for in the relaxed minutes of this calm stretch. You might notice how similar this is to the way people in every age behave at the sleepiest point of the night. There's always someone somewhere setting out clothes for morning, rinsing a cup, plugging in a device to charge. In the temples, scribes who have been up very late copying hymns stop, stretch their fingers, and put a small stone on top of the open page so the papyrus will not curl. The scribes of the gods are doing the same thing out here on the river of the Duet. They are making sure tomorrow's journey will run a little smoother because tonight, instead of collapsing instantly, they spent a few quiet moments straightening reality's desk. As the hour of repairs moves toward its end, the pace slows even further. The priest of the prow speaks less often. His jar of water is nearly empty, which is a pleasant excuse to rest his voice. Sial finishes his inspection and leans against the mast, eyes half closed, but you know he is still noticing everything. Who folds his invisible scrolls with the satisfaction of someone who has, at last, reached inbox 0. Man's coils are still rising and falling with Ra's easy breathing. The helmsman glances toward the next stretch of river where the caverns darken again. But there is no dread in it now, only the familiar curiosity of someone looking at tomorrow's calendar and thinking, yes, that seems manageable. No celebration is held for this hour. There is no hymn that shouts about the glory of touching up paint and updating phrasing. When ancient artists carved the journey of the sun god on tomb walls, they tended to focus on the gates and the monsters, the dramatic confrontations. Yet tucked between those vivid scenes, in narrower bands of hieroglyphs, the hour of repairs always sat there quietly, as if the artisans knew that without this sleepy maintenance, the showier parts would wobble. In the long corridors of the Valley of the Kings, the gods of paint and plaster did exactly what their divine counterparts do now. They corrected small flaws and then went home for breakfast. Soon, the boat will glide toward the last caverns, where light begins rehearsing how to be morning again. But for a few more moments, the universe is just a floating workshop lit by a muted sun. If you are still awake, you can imagine yourself among the crew, gently tapping a nail that does not strictly need it, or smoothing a piece of rope that was already quite straight. You can lend your attention to some tiny detail in your own room, The corner of a pillowcase, the edge of a curtain, the evenness of your breathing, and decide that for tonight, this small thing is fixed enough, good enough, safe enough. Then the river takes another slow bend. The sounds of adjustment taper off. Tools, if there were ever any, have been put away. Words settle like silt. The prow, freshly washed with spells, glows a little more confidently in the dark. The solar boat is ready again, not because anything spectacular has happened, but because every ordinary part has been quietly cared for. The gods stand where they always stand. The water clock drips its last drop for the hour. Somewhere very far above, a sleeper turns over, pulls the blanket up to their chin, and lets the night continue on without them, trusting that the next stretch of the journey will be just as patiently maintained. You probably don't imagine the sun traveling with something as boring as a timetable, but in Egypt, even Ra had a night schedule, and everyone was very polite about keeping to it. While your room is quiet and the light from your screen starts to feel a little like desert moonlight, we can drift along with that schedule for a while. If you happen to stay awake long enough to decide you like this journey, you can always subscribe or follow later, or forget completely and let that thought sink to the bottom of the Nile. The priests would have understood. Even they sometimes lost their place in the scrolls after the third yawn. The night begins at the western horizon, where sunset is treated like a doorway and not at all like a dramatic explosion. The solar boat glides toward it with a sort of divine punctuality. The prow nudges the first cavern of the duet as gently as a reed boat bumping a quiet landing stage. On deck, Ra stands beneath a canopy, not blazing as a noon sun, but wearing his old man version of light, softer and almost thoughtful. Around him take their places Sial, the god of perception, and Hu, the god of authoritative speech, which is essentially the divine department of seeing clearly and saying what actually needs to be said. You can imagine them as the cosmic project manager and the calm meeting facilitator, both on the night shift and both determined that nothing surprising will happen. At their feet coils Mahan, the protective serpent, wrapping the deck like a sleepy living railing. Stars stretch along the gunwale like quiet oarsmen, lining up in wet reflections on the river. The priests on shore know the moment has come because the smoke from the evening kifi drifts in a new direction, and because somewhere a water clock gives a solid little plunk as another measure spills into the lower bowl. They have gone over the route 100 times in lamplight. In the tombs, the walls are painted with a map, 12 registers stacked one above the other. Calm and rectangular as a very ancient spreadsheet, each happens to correspond with an hour of the night, which is convenient if you are Ra, and enjoy knowing exactly when you will meet a cavern full of snakes, or a gatekeeper with very specific questions. Beside the painted boat, hieroglyphs name every crew member, every cavern, every guardian. The Amduat and the Book of Gates sit nearby in papyrus form, like travel handbooks with no photographs and many, many footnotes. They explain who to greet, which spells to use, and at which terrifying creature you are allowed to simply nod and keep rowing. As the bark noses into darkness, a quiet rhythm begins. 1 hour per gate. No drifting ahead of schedule, no heroic shortcuts. The helmsman keeps the boat so steady that you could balance a small alabaster cup on the rail and not spill a drop. Under the deck, perhaps you imagine the souls of the blessed sliding past, wrapped carefully in linen, each with its own set of instructions written on the inside of the coffin like bedtime reading. Ra's journey is not a frantic battle. It is closer to a well-organized night train. Someone has checked the route. Someone has stacked the provisions. Someone has oil for the lamps. And everyone knows that sunrise is going to show up exactly when the last cavern is done, not a minute earlier. Deeper in the Duat, when the world above is properly asleep, and the human city quiets down to the soft sounds of dogs turning in their sleep and wooden shutters ticking in the cool, the boat glides past the fields of the blessed. Mummies rest in their fine linen, and the rays of Ra's hidden disk touch them almost politely. The spells painted and written earlier in the day, perhaps years before, now act like tiny labels, waking jars and amulets with meaning. A little protective eye, only a few centimeters wide, turns from decoration into a sort of nightlight for the soul. Offerings written on the walls become food in the invisible fields. An inscription promising loaves becomes the warm idea of bread, good enough to satisfy a spirit that has learned to prefer symbols to crumbs. The dead breathe again as the boat passes, not with drama, but with the faint shift you feel when you take a deeper breath in your sleep and dawn to wake up. Above, in a temple far away on the surface, a priest stands next to a clepsydra, a water clock. It looks simple, an elegant stone vessel, narrow at the bottom, carved with little notches that correspond to the hours. The water drips through the hole with remarkable patience. Every time the surface sinks to a mark, the priest quietly notes that the boat has passed another gate. It is a bit like live stream tracking, but done entirely with clay, water, and trust. He recites the names that oil the gates, one by one, carefully, because the gods enjoy accurate pronunciation. Kiffy burns in a nearby brazier, a mixture of resins and herbs so comforting that Egyptian texts mention it as something you might burn, not only for gods, but also for your own mood. The smoke rises in slow curls, each one another unhurried reminder that the minutes have no intention of going anywhere else. In this middle stretch of night, Ra's crew is busy in ways that are, if we are honest, not very glamorous. There are storerooms of warmth to open, where the sun's energy is portioned out to the justified dead. There are caverns filled with snake gods and crocodile spirits who are mostly dangerous if you forget to adjust them properly. Seal watches carefully for wrong turns. Who shapes the spells with measured, precise phrases. When you think of magic, you might imagine lightning or sudden transformation, but here it is more like carefully filling out forms in the right sequence. The boat moves, words are spoken, gates swing, and the night continues. It is oddly comforting to know that, across the whole universe, someone is basically doing admin. Meanwhile, your own thoughts may start drifting, wandering toward tomorrow's tasks, then circling back. That's all right. The priests would tell you to let them float along behind the solar bark, a little convoy of worries. Each time Res crew breathes together, they inhale on a silent 4 and exhale on a quiet 6. You can borrow that rhythm if you like, as if joining a very ancient breathing exercise class. Inhale for the slow count of 4, exhale for the slow count of 6, while the painted caverns pass by in steady order. Somewhere in the inscriptions, a little figure of you could be added, seated cross-legged near the stern, holding nothing but a comfortable blanket. Eventually the route tightens. We reach the stretch the texts call the place where the river narrows, those hours 7 to 9, where Apophis, the great serpent of chaos, prefers to appear. You might expect a huge cinematic confrontation, but the Egyptians were surprisingly reserved about it. Apophis is described as thick darkness, a long resistance to movement, a refusal rather than a storm. The reeds along the banks grow taller, pressing in. The silence of the water grows a spine. The boat steers forward without speeding up. On the walls of tombs, the scene looks intense. A huge serpent, spears, nets, gods in disciplined poses. In the imagination of a sleepy listener, though, Apophis could just as easily be that one stubborn thought that refuses to leave the brain at midnight. Ra's crew handles him the way you might handle that thought, not by panic, but by gentle persistence. Spells are spoken in short, clear knots, each carefully tied sentence pulling the serpent tighter. Deities with knives and lassos surround him like co-workers finally dealing with an overflowing inbox. Meshnu loosens his coils from around the boat, stretches along the gunwale, and checks the rail where the darkness presses. The prow is touched with words that have been rehearsed so often that even the wood must know them by now. The deck seems to hold its breath, then release it again without any applause. Apophis is not killed permanently. That would have ruined the structure of the night. Instead, he is pinned down just enough to let the bark pass, as if the universe were gently hitting the snooze button on chaos. "We'll talk again tomorrow," the gods seem to say, in the patient tone of those who know the schedule is on their side. When the narrow stretches over, the river of the Duet widens again. The tension does not break dramatically. It simply seeps away like heat from a stone step before dawn. The crew goes back to their tasks. CL notes what has been learned. Who files the phrasing for next time, so the spells will be exactly as effective on the next night, and the next after that. Mayhem, satisfied, coils back around the god like a cool living rope. You can almost feel the deck exhale with them. No celebration follows because the point is not victory but continuity. It is very comforting, in an odd way, that the gods do not throw a party for surviving the routine. They simply reset the board. Up on the surface, the water clock has gone on dripping with absolute loyalty, marking every moment of this unseen negotiation. The priest glances at the level, murmurs another name, adjusts a wick that has burned too low. Perhaps his own mind wanders for a moment to mundane things, the state of the temple roof, the timing of tomorrow's bread delivery, the way sand somehow finds its way into every hinge. Still, his voice stays steady. The smoke continues to curl up. Somewhere beyond the walls, a desert dog howls once, then thinks better of it and lies down again. Night wraps itself back around the precinct. As hours 10 to 12 approach, the last caverns of the Duet open ahead like a sequence of increasingly pale rooms. Dismembered light lies scattered there, waiting to be collected. The texts describe the eastern horizon as a place where the sun is assembled from pieces. A quiet backstage where stars hand down what they have stored and caverns pass their portions forward. Rise steps toward youth again with the help of names. Every time a priest, a magician, or a faithful grandmother in a village recites one of his epithets, a little piece of light is placed back in his hands. It is a bit like a cosmic lost and found run by librarians. Nothing dramatic, just careful sorting and returning. On board, each god has a role in this assembling. The crew arranges color, heat, wind. The steering oar leans a little more eastward. The air takes on the faintest chill of early morning that you might recognize from the moment just before your alarm is supposed to ring. Nothing is rushed. There are still gates to pass, guardians to greet, nods to exchange. Every click of time slips into place like a bead on a string. The bark passes through halls where a future sunlight lies asleep in coils, waiting to be poured out over fields, courtyards, and schoolyards where children will later complain that it is too bright. The Egyptians like to imagine that all of this could be kept in one jar. A text might suggest placing the names of the 12 hours, the 12 gates, and the one boat together, then keeping your hope in another container entirely, small and steady. It is strangely good bedtime advice. You can imagine taking each of your worries tomorrow's tasks, unfinished conversations, half-remembered notifications, and filing them into a jar labeled for morning, setting it on the shelf beside Ra's timetable. It will be there when the bark emerges, but it does not need to ride on the deck with you now. As the eastern horizon brightens, the boat approaches its final cavern, not with a triumphant fanfare, but as calmly as it left the west. In the world above, windows start to learn the new light. The first birds clear their throats. On some rooftop, a woman sets out dough to rise, not knowing or needing to know that she is part of the same long process of assembly. In the temple, the last measures of the water clock drip through. The priest notes the hour, extinguishes the brazier, and perhaps allows himself a small private yawn. The duty of watching the night is complete, but tomorrow, exactly the same process will unfold again. No cliffhanger, just an elegant loop. You can picture the painted map on the tomb wall being rolled up gently, the ink of its lines still promising that order lives inside darkness. The bark rises toward the horizon, but in this telling, we do not follow it all the way out. We stay in that soft moment just before the first ray breaks, in the quiet space where Ray is fully assembled but not yet announced. The timetable has been kept. Every gate has had its hour. Every cavern has heard its required words. Now the gods wait, and the world waits, and you can rest comfortably in the pause between. You close the inner map, you dim the inner lamp, and you let the last part of the night stretch out, knowing that somewhere a reed boat continues its shift right on schedule, slipping forward on a river that has absolutely nowhere else it would rather be going. You would think that a god's night shift would be dramatic loud, full of lightning and heroic speeches, but on the solar boat of Ray, by the time the last hours of the night arrive, everything is strangely quiet and logistical. The great serpent has already been dealt with in an earlier hour, more or less the way you might deal with an annoying notification and then forget about it. Now the river of the underworld moves at a steady, sleepy pace. The crew is still at their posts, but their movements have the relaxed precision of people who have done this every single night since the first sunrise. Somewhere above all this, on the surface of the world, someone is rolling over in bed and trying to decide whether it is worth getting up to check the time. Down here, the time is very clear. We are entering the 10th hour of night. The boat knows it as well as the water clock in the temple. If you're somehow still awake in a little while, you can decide whether you want to follow this timetable again another night, maybe even subscribe to Russ' very predictable channel, or you can simply let that thought drift off like a papyrus boat and pretend you never heard the suggestion. The caverns around you feel different now. Earlier in the night, they were crowded with guardians, secret gates, and complicated instructions, like the divine version of airport security. But by the 10th hour, the duet has begun to thin out. The walls pull away, the ceiling lifts. There is more space for the boat to breathe, and for you to imagine the water stretching on in the dark. The crew walks more slowly, yet nothing is lazy. Ciel, the god of perception, still keeps his sharp watch at the prow, though what he mostly perceives now is the steady repetition of ripples against the hull. Who, authoritative speech, is technically ready to issue powerful commands, but the only orders needed are small, practical ones. Adjust the rudder, check the ropes, refill the brazier with another pinch of Kiffy. You can almost see him, this god of majestic words, leaning on the rail, and occasionally offering a single syllable like left or steady, which is probably not what the hymn writers had in mind, but the universe is built from small, precise instructions, and so is a good bedtime. This is the part of the journey when dismembered light is gathered. The ancient texts love that phrase. They talk about sunlight as if it shattered at dusk into 1,000 pieces like a very fragile glass ornament, and the job of these last hours is to collect every fragment, label it neatly, and send it back up to the sky. In each cavern, the boat glides past shelves and shelves of light, packed away like jars in a careful storeroom. Some jars glow faintly, as if remembering what it felt like to shine on someone's breakfast. Others are dim and sleepy, the leftovers of sunsets from forgotten days. Priests in the temples above describe all this with professional seriousness, but if you listen closely, you can hear a sort of cosmic tidying up happening. Every scrap of yesterday's brightness is being picked up from the floor of the world. RAA is not allowed to leave the universe messy. There is no maybe tomorrow option on this chore chart. The blessed dead join in their own quiet way. When the bark passes their fields, they lift their heads as the faint rays from the boat touch the bandages wrapping their faces. They do not sit up dramatically. They do not deliver speeches. They simply inhale a little more easily, as if the warmth reminds them that their hearts were judged and found light. Their job in these hours is surprisingly humble, They hand back light they no longer need. In the myths, they pass glow after glow toward the river, like neighbors returning borrowed lamps. It is the opposite of hoarding. No one clutching a sunbeam mutters, just in case. Everything is given back, sorted, and stacked. In our world, mornings can feel rushed and unfinished. In theirs, dawn is a carefully audited process. Above, in the temples, a priest stands beside a water clock, watching drops fall with meticulous patience. Every drop that leaves the bowl below marks another small movement of the bark through a cavern. Another crate of light checked off a long celestial inventory. The priest recites lists of gate names, crew names, hours, and half hours. These are not particular thrilling lists. They sound a bit like reading out the stops on a very long bus route, but there is comfort in that too. The sacred calendar of the night is like one of those timetables posted on a station wall. Tiny columns, carefully inked, that say, without fanfare, yes, the boat came yesterday. Yes, it will come again tonight. If you have trouble trusting that the morning will arrive, the Egyptians would remind you, there is paperwork for this. There are rosters. There are forms. As the boat enters the 11th hour, something subtle changes. The water around the hull feels cooler, as if it has traveled far enough from the heat of the day to start wanting warmth again. Caverns give way to long galleries like the backstage corridors of the sky. Here, the crew of gods begins what could only be called assembling the morning. All the light they have collected must now be put back together into a single coherent day. It is slightly like building a very complicated piece of furniture with no picture on the box, except that the gods have been doing it every night since time began, so they hardly need the instructions anymore. You can imagine them laying everything out on invisible tables. There's the pale light that always falls on fishermen's nets. There's the bright shard that belongs to someone's kitchen floor. There are those soft, sideways beams that slip into bedrooms a little too early, landing right on someone's closed eyelids. Each type of light has its own place in the boxes. A goddess with careful hands checks them against the divine shipping list. The Egyptians gave some of these organizers names that sound more like job titles than personalities. She who collects the hours, she who brings what is ordered. They stand around like experienced stage managers, quietly rearranging the cosmos so that the show can go on without anyone tripping over a misplaced ray. Ra, who is very much a professional at this, does not rush the process. He moves along the deck, picking up one beam of light at a time, fitting them into the body he will wear at dawn. In the earlier hours of the night, he was a hidden sun, small and enclosed, traveling almost like a seed. Now, piece by piece, he is dressing himself in day. One golden fragment becomes the shine on the river. Another becomes the glow on temple walls. A little streak is set aside to be the highlight on a Kata's eye as it sits in a doorway pretending not to watch you. Nothing is wasted. Even the faintest glimmer finds a home. It is oddly reassuring to think that somewhere in this mythic inventory, there is a box labeled with the exact kind of light that might be spilling into your room right now. Somewhere in the duet, a goddess could point to a shelf and say, yes, that one. That's the soft line of brightness that lands across that person's pillow at that angle at that time. In a world where mornings can feel random and unfair, the Egyptians imagined a backstage where nothing about dawn was accidental. It was all deliberate, all packed and unpacked every night, with the sort of stubborn reliability you usually only see in public servants and cats who insist breakfast is due. Around this time, the living priests above might be refilling the incense burners. Kiffy smoke rises in curls that try very hard to look like the meandering river of the underworld. The scent is sweet and complicated. Wine, honey, resin. A few things that would look like random crumbs if you saw them on a modern kitchen shelf. The smoke also measures time in its own way. As the stick grows shorter, the bark draws closer to the horizon. This is the 11th hour's quiet secret. The world smells its way toward morning. Here, too, is where small oaths are whispered. Not dramatic vows, not thunderous promises, just tiny agreements between the waking and the soon-to-wake. A farmer might murmur that he will water his field carefully today, no more, no less. A scribe might decide that after sunrise, he will finish the line of text he postponed yesterday. These intentions are hardly newsworthy, but they are what the morning is built from. In myth, they gather in the air like thin threads, drifting down toward the duet. Ra's crew picks them up along with the light, tying them to the appropriate hours. This way, when the 10th, 11th, and 12th hours of the day roll past, the promises have somewhere to land. By the time the 12th hour of night opens ahead, the world is mostly ready, even if it does not yet suspect it. On the boat, everyone checks their position. Mehen, the protective serpent, loops loosely around the deck, not quite as tense as when Apophis lurked in earlier caverns. He is like a security guard finishing the last patrol of the night, knowing that most of the troublemakers already went home. Xiao and Hu stand a little straighter. The crew of lesser deities settle their grips on the oars. No one is surprised. This is the part of the shift they could do almost with their eyes closed, which is convenient because the night is doing exactly that. The 12th hour is sometimes described as a place where the sky and the underworld shake hands. The texts say that the corpse of Re, the one that has been carried in the boat, approaches the end of the cave and merges with his living body above. This might sound intense, but the Egyptians talk about it with the calm of people explaining a daily commute. In more relaxed terms, you could imagine that the god has been using the night to send himself a very long, very detailed email, and now at dawn he finally opens it and becomes fully updated on whatever happened in yesterday's universe. No one gasps. They just nod, satisfied that synchronization is complete. For pilgrims who once listened to these stories in dim temple halls, the 12th hour had a very practical use. It reassured them that, no matter how tangled their day had been, there were always gods somewhere quietly putting it back in order. The boat did not miss a gate. The crew did not forget an address. Even if clouds would hide the sunrise from their eyes, the timetable itself remained intact. This is perhaps the most Egyptian kind of comfort. Not that life is easy, but that the schedule is reliable. Now we reach the gentlest part of the myth, the one that folds neatly into your own bedtime. In some versions, they say that at the exact edge of dawn, a person might speak a bedtime oath for daybreak. The phrase sounds contradictory on purpose, like saying good night and good morning at the same time. The oath is simple. It is not about heroism or a miraculous change. It goes something like, as Ra rises, I will take one small step, not all 12, not the impossible leap, just one. The Egyptians had watched enough sunrises to know that a day doesn't demand everything at once. It arrives millimeter by millimeter along the eastern horizon, and human effort can be allowed to be just as incremental. So, in our retelling, you can imagine yourself standing, not in a temple dressed in linen, but right where you are, wrapped in whatever passes for sacred linen in your room, perhaps a slightly tangled blanket. You do not need a water clock or a papyrus scroll. You only need the quiet thought that when morning reaches you, you might do one gentle thing a little more carefully. Pour a drink without haste. Look once more at the sky before checking your messages. Put on your shoes with the calm dignity of someone who knows that. Ra's crew worked all night simply to make sure there would be enough light for you to see them. The oath does not require you to stay awake to witness the sunrise. In fact, it rather assumes that you will not. The priests who recited the hours of the night often did so in shifts. Someone else took over when they grew too tired. The myth understands human limits. You are invited to hand the rest of the journey back to the boat. Let the gods deal with the last narrow stretch of the duet. Let Mehen guard the deck against any final shadows. Let Xiao and Hu steer through the unseen gates. Your part for now is only to breathe in and out, as steadily as the water clock's drops, and to allow your thoughts to become as loosely coiled as the serpent resting around the rails. Far ahead, the eastern horizon of the underworld brightens in a way that is not yet visible above. Caverns pass their collected light forward, first the dim glows from distant days, then the fresh shine gathered from the fields of the blessed, then the thin pearly band that always appears behind mountain ridges. Each portion clicks into place in Ra's body like pieces in a puzzle that has been solved, so often it no longer feels like solving anything at all. It is just what happens. It is just how morning is. You can notice, if you wish, how closely this resembles the small turning of your own mind toward rest. Fragments of the day, previously scattered conversations, worries, half-finished tasks are being gathered up and put in their boxes. Some are stacked neatly under tomorrow. Others are quietly dissolved into the river, no longer needed. The solar boat of your attention passes by each memory and decides whether to keep it, store it, or let it sink into the soft mud of forgetfulness. Nothing dramatic, no ceremony, just gentle sorting. When the bark finally reaches the hidden gate that leads back into the sky, there is no sudden fanfare. The texts describe doors, hinges, and opening, but they do not dwell on the mechanics. To them, the astonishing thing is not that Ra rises. It is that he always rose yesterday and will rise again tomorrow. The miracle has become routine, and in that routine lies the deepest comfort. The boat passes through, the crew adjust their positions for daytime duties, and the do-it recedes behind them like a hallway after you leave a building. But for you, listening here, the story does not need to follow. You can let the boat continue on without your attention. You do not have to accompany Rod up into the glare of the morning. In the Smith, your role is entirely optional. You are allowed to step off in the last cavern, sit on a stone warmed by stored sunlight, and simply rest. The schedule will continue whether you supervise it or not. Above, windows will gradually learn the new light. Cats will blink and stretch. Someone will wake up mildly puzzled about a dream involving a very well-organized river. On the horizon, the disk of Ra will appear exactly on time, wearing every piece of light his crew so carefully assembled. All of that will happen later. For now, in this last soft hour of the night's journey, you can imagine the boat gliding on, steady, and sure, while you drift in the opposite direction, sinking not into darkness, but into a deeper, quieter chamber of sleep. The water clock in the temple ticks on, counting minutes you no longer need to number. Kiffy smoke thins into the rafters. The priests finish their recitations and let silence take over, just as the caverns of the Duat fall silent behind the passing boat. Everything that must be done for morning is already underway, carried out by hands and names that have practiced for thousands of years. There is nothing they need from you. The timetable is kept, the route is known, the gates are familiar. You are free to let your thoughts fade like the last stars giving way to dawn, and if you wake to the light later, you can simply nod back at Ra, quietly pleased to know that you were here in a story while the universe did its nightly soothing work.